When my uncle passed away, I expected to inherit his old ranch house. I never imagined the paperwork would include 1,800 acres of land. The deed had been in our family for generations, stretching farther than I could see. But there was one detail hidden inside those old records that nobody had warned me about. The next week, I drove out to see what I had inherited. The land seemed endless. Open fields, wooded areas, old ranch roads, and cattle pasture. It was more land than I had ever imagined owning. Then, as I reached the eastern boundary, I saw something that didn't belong in the middle of it. Across the eastern section of my inheritance stood an entire neighborhood. There were streets, luxury homes, fences, and hundreds of residents living there. At first, I assumed my uncle had leased that section to the development years ago. But when I checked the paperwork again, I couldn't find a single lease. I hadn't been standing there long before the HOA president came looking for me. Linda Parker demanded to know why I was walking around near the neighborhood boundary. I told her I was inspecting the land I had just inherited. She laughed and said the entire community had been there long before I ever showed up. I asked Linda one simple question. If the neighborhood was legally on my family's land, where was the lease? She immediately said the HOA had every right to be there. But when I asked her to show me the agreement, her confidence started to change. That night, I went through every document my uncle had left behind. Some of the records were decades old, but the property lines were remarkably clear. The HOA had been built inside the boundaries of the original ranch. And still, there was no lease, no easement, and no agreement explaining why. I didn't want to rely on old paperwork alone. So I hired Robert Hayes, an experienced land surveyor, to inspect the boundaries. He checked the original markers, the county coordinates, and the recorded property lines. Then he looked toward the neighborhood and told me I needed to see something. The original boundary marker was exactly where the survey said it would be, and it wasn't outside the neighborhood. It was deep inside it. Robert checked the coordinates again, just to make sure. The homes around us were sitting on land my family had legally owned all along. Linda immediately called the HOA's lawyers. She insisted there had to be a document proving the neighborhood had the right to stay. The attorney started searching through decades of records and development files. But every minute that passed without finding a lease made the situation worse. The survey, the deed, and the old county records were all pointing to the same conclusion. I looked at the HOA board and asked them one final question. If my family owned this land and nobody could produce a lease, what exactly had they been relying on all these years? For the first time, the entire board went completely silent. I thought I had inherited a ranch with a few forgotten corners. But the old county records told a completely different story. The red boundary line surrounded all 1,800 acres, and right in the middle of it sat the entire HOA community. We searched for a lease, an easement, or any agreement giving them permission. Hours passed as my attorney checked document after document, but there was nothing connecting the HOA to my family's land. They had built an entire neighborhood without paying rent to anyone. The more I studied the map, the more unbelievable it became. Every street, every lawn, and every expensive house sat inside my boundary. The HOA wasn't next to my property. The HOA was sitting right in the middle of it. I requested a meeting with the HOA board the very next morning. I showed them the deed and the original survey. At first, they laughed and said there had to be a mistake. Then I asked them one simple question. Show me your lease. Nobody answered. The president shuffled through papers while the other board members avoided eye contact. Their confidence disappeared as my attorney placed the county survey on the table. For the first time, they realized this problem wasn't going away. The HOA hired its own surveyor, hoping my records were wrong. A week later, he walked the boundary and checked every marker. His measurements matched my family's deed exactly. The entire development was inside my inherited property. News spread through the neighborhood faster than the HOA could control it. Homeowners began asking what this meant for their houses and their streets. I made one thing clear. I wasn't there to throw families out. I wanted a fair and legal agreement for the land they had been using. Their lawyers finally contacted mine and asked to negotiate. They knew fighting the deed in court could become far more expensive, So I offered them a long-term lease with clear boundaries and fair payments. For the first time, the HOA had to treat my property like it actually belonged to me. After weeks of negotiations, the agreement was finally ready. The HOA would continue operating, but now under a legal lease. They would pay rent for the land my family had owned for generations, and every boundary would be officially recognized from that day forward. I didn't need revenge, and I didn't need to destroy anyone's home. I just needed the truth about what my family had left behind. In the end, the HOA learned that a deed can be more powerful than a boardroom full of excuses. And now, every month, the people who once ignored my ownership pay rent for the land beneath their community.